In this video, I'm going to give you a walkthrough of the PreSonus Studio Live 32SC digital sound console. I've configured this mixer for the worship band at our church, and I'm going to give you an overview of the control surface, the processing, the routing, the effects, the recording features, and more. Keep watching because you'll learn why this console is a great fit for small to mid-sized churches. Coming up. My name is Spencer Trefsker, and I'm one of the instructors here at Churchfront, helping you lead gospel-centered and tech-savvy worship. Before we get started, if you have any thoughts on this console, if you've used it before, let us know. Leave a line in the comments, any questions or thoughts you have now, or as we go through the video, we'd love to connect with you in the comments. All right, now it's time to dive into the Studio Live 32SC digital console by PreSonus. As you can see before me here, we've got the control surface laid out. And one of the great things about this mixer is it's got a lot of room to work considering its small form factor. So the first thing we want to look at with this mixer is the fader bank. What are we working with here? So if I go here and I make sure I've selected my inputs button on this bank here, what I'm going to see is all of my channel inputs. There's also a great piece of software called Universal Control that you can get from PreSonus's website. I'm running it on this laptop here so that you guys can screencast what I'm doing on the mixer. It's a great way you can run it on an iPad or on a laptop to give you more flexibility to run your best mix on Sunday. Now, when I have things laid out here, you can see that I have channels 1 through 16 on my fader bank, and I've got my master fader here on the far right. Now, just like most mixers, you're going to have more inputs than you have faders. So to get to our second and third pages of fader banks, in order to see all the inputs that we have to work with, I'm gonna hit this next button on the actual mixing console. And on the app, I'm just gonna keep scrolling to the right to see all the fader banks open up. So on page 2, I've got 17 through 32 input channels. And if I go to page 3, I've got my 4 effects returns right here. And then I've got my 2 aux ins, my tape in, and my talkback mic all there. So that's how we navigate our inputs on this mixer. So now that we can see where our inputs go, let's just really quickly show how to program and process a channel. So I'm gonna go to an open channel that I haven't used yet. So I'm gonna go to here to channel 20. I'm gonna push the select button on channel 20. I'm also going to go in the Universal Control app to channel 20, and I'm gonna select it here. Now what I wanna do is I want to pick an input. So I'm just going to duplicate an input from the Pro Tools session we're using for all of our other channels. And I'm going to paste the kick drum into channel 20. So I know from my Pro Tools session that the kick is channel 1. And so what I'm going to do on the mixer is I'm going to select the channel like I've seen, and up here on this input bank, you can see that there's an analog, network, USB, and SD card options for input type. Right now, I want to be running USB because I'm running all of my inputs through the card off of the laptop. If I was running a direct in from the back of the mixer, I would go analog. Right now, I'm going to go USB. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure the input button is selected so that I can see my inputs, and I'm going to go to the little gear. I can do it on my touch screen here on the mixer, which is a really nice feature of this mixer, or I can go to the gear icon in the app and go to routing. Now it's automatically selected channel 20 because that's the input channel, but I want to go to USB 1. You can see on the left side here, this is analog inputs. This looks like a face, but it's XLR pins. This would be your network ins, this is USB, and this is the SD card if you're playing back a multi-track recording. So I'm going to go to input number 1 and tell it I want to pull number 1 in from the Pro Tools session. And then I'm going to go to this naming section here, go to percussion. I'm going to go to drums. I'm going to select kick. And then I'm going to name it, well, it's already named kick. And if I wanted to group all my drums blue, I'd do it right there. Now I'm going to get out of this by pressing the gear icon, which takes me back to the home screen. And now channel 20 is ready to go. So I'm going to put my fader up at unity. Now, what we do here on this mixer to kind of get started for processing channels is you want to start by pushing the input button here on the far left of this channel bank. Now, with this whole section up here on this physical mixer, this is what's called the fat channel control. I don't know what fat channel means, but it's easy to remember, which is nice. And I have to say, I really like how simple it is to get to the controls on this mixer compared to some other ones I've worked with, because all you need to do to adjust some things for this mixer for a specific channel is just hit select here, and then it immediately loads into this fat channel control, and I just have to tell it, what do I want to adjust? Do I want to adjust the gate, the compressor, the EQ, or even where the aux sends are going? So I can do all that pretty efficiently and quickly, which is really important in a live mixing environment. So for the kick drum, let's just say I want to put some really basic parameters on there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now that I've got it loaded is I'm going to go to the gate, and that's already been selected here. I need to hit, there's a button called on. Okay, this processor button here, on, we're going to just select that right there. That enables the gate to be engaged. And then what's really nice if you're working just on the actual mixer is that this touchscreen works together with this what's called master fader, which basically lets me pick a category. So right now it auto defaults to threshold, but if I wanted to change the attack or the range or the release, all I have to do is tap that on the touchscreen. So if I go to threshold, I use this master fader and I start changing the parameter of that noise gate up to wherever I need it to be. Okay, so I'm using the master fader. There is also a gate fader that's hardwired into the system that always means gate. So there's two ways to do that on the fader. You can either use the on-off button in the processor section, or you can see right here it says gate, and then on and off right there, and I'm going to control that right there. However, if I want to change the range or the attack, I can't use this fader. This only controls threshold. This fader here, this master fader, controls whatever I'm telling it to do. So you can also do all these controls on the app. All you have to do is go over and follow along right here with your mouse. So there's a really neat feature in this app where you can quickly and easily copy and paste attributes from one channel to another. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. I've already got a kick channel lined up on channel 1 from earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that here. There's a button up here on the fat channel control that says copy. So I'm going to go to that. I'm going to hit copy. And now you'll notice my entire fader bank is blinking with all the other input channels I could paste to. So what I'm going to do is go back over to channel 20, which I've named kick, but I haven't done anything really to the parameters. I'm going to hit select, and then I'm going to hit load. Now that I've done that, all of the parameters that I set before on kick channel 1 from when the first time I set it up are now immediately right there on channel 20. Okay, so I'm going to look back at channel 20. Let's go to the gate. It's set right there. The compressor is set. The EQ is set. They're all engaged. And the aux sends are there, but we'll get into that in a second. So that's a really quick way to copy and paste if you need to move a channel from one place to another. If you want to slide all your channels down one because you had a gap, it takes so much less time than doing this by hand. All you have to, and you can copy and paste onto an existing channel. It doesn't have to be blank, and I think that's a huge benefit. So just real quick to show how we can go through the rest of the fat channel controls. If I've got my channel selected and I go to gate, I'm going to see that adjusted there. The compressor is next in the chain, so that's going to be here. And you can control all of your parameters on the touch screen or by using the shortcut button here, which again only adjusts threshold. And then real quick, what I've noticed about this mixer that I didn't see in some other ones I've worked with is that the key source feature on the right-hand side on the touchscreen is defaulted to none. So what that means is it's not listening for a particular channel or frequency specifically to enable that dynamic or effect. Make sure you pay attention to this because this can really help, especially your noise gate, be most effective. So if you want to go to your key source, for right now we're in channel 20. I've copied everything here from channel 1, so it's going to default to channel 20. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to scroll down using my master fader here to see channel 20. I'm going to hit channel 20, which means it's now listening to itself. And from before, I told it to listen to about 200 hertz for the kick drum to isolate that frequency, which is a really key frequency, hence the term key filter for that instrument. And it's also separate from everything around it so that it's really only listening to what the kick drum is doing when it decides to compress or open the noise gate. So just something to be aware of. You don't have to touch that if you don't want to, but if you're used to that, you're gonna need to do that manually on this mixer. If I get to go to EQ, so as you can see, the high pass filter is here, which is a hard button on the fat channel control. It always controls your high pass filter for the channel selected. The other buttons here below are gonna be your low EQ control, and you get your gain, frequency, and your Q or your width here. You're gonna use that, so you're gonna decide which band am I going to work with on this 4-band parametric EQ, and then you're going to find the frequency you want to adjust. You can go up or down with the gain, and then you can adjust your width to be narrow or wide depending on where you want to go. Now be careful because this high pass filter knob is near all these other knobs, and all these knobs up here on this fat channel control will work even if that's not up on the screen. So if I have my effects rack up here and I'm looking at effect A right now and I'm messing with that and I touch the high pass filter control, whatever channel I was previously selecting, that is going to now be adjusted. The next thing we want to look at after we've learned how to process our individual channels is how to do DCA groups. This is a really big part of mixing, and it's a great way to simplify your workflow on a Sunday. So, as we said before, there's a bank section here on the mixer with inputs, DCA groups, mix, FX masters, and user. I'm gonna go to DCA groups now, and now my fader bank is aligned through the 16 DCA groups I get to work with. Now, that's a lot more DCA groups than a lot of these compact mixers come from, and that's because of the way that PreSonus designed this board to have one bank only. Now that has some drawbacks, but the benefit is that you aren't trying to balance two different banks that only have 4 or maybe 8 faders each. You get 16 of one category every time it's up. So for DCA groups, this is great because it allows you to have 16 different groups up at the same time. So almost no matter how many inputs you have, you should be able to see almost everything on one page. So you can see now that my DCA groups are selected, I've got 4 DCA groups here. Now, let's say that I want to make a 5th DCA group of just our Ableton tracks. So I'm going to actually go over here to the DCA groups in the master control. And what that lets me do is on the touch screen, I can select DCA 5 or 6 or whatever one I want to adjust. So I'm going to go to DCA 5 right now. And I'm gonna go to edit. Now that I've hit edit, all I have to do is select the buttons that I want to go in this group. So I'm gonna put the click, the bass track, and the Ableton tracks into this group. And then if I want to rename it, all I have to do is tap there and type Ableton, which I'm actually gonna do in the app. And done. There. Now I have DCA group 5, which is now named Ableton. So if I go to my DCA groups on the master, it's going to pull up the individual channels in my DCA group. So now if I select my DCA group button here in the fader bank, it's going to bring up all 5 of my DCA groups. Now I just have to hit select for the one I want to see individually, and now all the channels in this DCA group show up, and I can adjust those levels individually. Now what's interesting about the DCA groups on this is that if I go back and I pull my Ableton group to -10 and then I go into that group, you'll see that now all these things, all the faders are actually pulled down to -10. My bass and Ableton tracks individually, even on the master inputs, they're down here at 10 dB below where they used to be. If I go back to my DCA and I push it up to Unity and I go back to my inputs, bass and my Ableton tracks are back near Unity where they were before. You may not be used to this, but it is a nice reminder visually that your DCA group is affecting the overall level of certain channels. This feature in this mixer helps you remember that if your DCA group is on and it's at -20, your faders are going to be at -20, and it's going to remind you that you need to change your overall group. Now you can turn this feature off. There's a traditional DCA button on the touchscreen. If I touch that right there, it eliminates, and you can see a lot of these realigned, it eliminates the connection between the DCA fader level and the channel fader level. If I disable that, and I'm touching it, then it goes back and they're linked again. The third thing we want to look at when it comes to the bank options on this mixer is the button called Mix FX Masters. So I'm going to go there now, and if you go there in the app, you just go to the Mixes button, and you can see you've got mixes here. I've made a mix called Jake Ears because this is going to be where you put your in-ear monitors for the most part, your subgroups, and all of your matrices. Okay, so you have 16 sub mixes that you can make any way you want on this mixer. It's a huge benefit compared to some other systems that are out there. So you're gonna see all these buttons 1 through 16 right here on the left-hand side. And so I've made mix number 1 lined up right here. Mix number 1 is Jake's ears. So if I wanna see what's going on in Jake's inner monitors, all I have to do is push mix 1 here. So this is a little bit different than what we've been running on Sundays, but if I wanna give Jake some kick and some snare, and make sure he can hear the toms, and then definitely hear his voice and the other vocalists, guitar, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then we gotta make sure click is nice and high. So from my Mix FX Masters page, I can see all 16 of these custom mixes. So if I want to see what's going on inside mix 1, which is Jake's ears, if Jake says, hey, I can't hear enough of me in my monitor, then what I would do is I'd hit select, and I would go to mix 1 here in the mix matrix selection page on the left hand side. So mix 1 is now pulled up on the faders, and I can see absolutely everything going into Jake's ears, and you can see that here on the app as well. And so from this position, I can adjust manually any of the things going into submix number 1. Now if I'm done with that, I can just push this big main mix button here. I can just hit the button main on the app, and you're back at home bass. Now really quickly, I want to show you a really cool feature of this mixer on the fader bank that I haven't seen before, which is called User. This mixer has a lot of functionality for loading different personality profiles. Deeper within it, you can even have different users with different permissions to make sure that your volunteer who doesn't really know routing and processing doesn't get tangled up in any of those things, but still allows your main sound person to get in there whenever they want. But we won't get into that right now, but you do have the user fader bank option here, and that's the green button at the bottom right of the bank section on the top left. So I'm gonna push that. You can see I've already set this the way that I want to mix on Sunday. So while the DCA group page is fantastic, I don't always want to group everything that we mix because sometimes there's just not enough channels for it to make sense to be a group. So what's so great about this user layout is that I can on one page have a complete mix, whatever I want, of individual channel inputs, subgroups, aux inputs, DCA groups, and aux ins. And so I can basically take the 16 most used channels that I end up flipping page to page to page for and just put them all right next to each other. So what I've done on Fader Bank 1 here is I've made all the drums into a subgroup. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. And so all my drums run on this fader. Then I've got Jake's vocal and the other female lead vocal right next to each other so that I can easily switch who is leading. Got my acoustic guitar, Jake's acoustic guitar here. I've got the bass track here. I've got keys Then I've got the Ableton tracks here, and then I've got the 2 Pastor mics here, and our aux in from our computer is gonna be here. And what I can do on these last 4 channels, I can put my effects returns, I can put some other input channels I didn't have room for, some other instruments I go to all the time, basically anything that I used to have to flip between pages to get to rapidly, I can now have right in front of me here. It's fantastic. Speaking of effects, the effects are really easy to work with and get to in this mixer. And so what you can see is on the left-hand side in my bank controls, when it says mix select, we've got all 16 of our custom mixes here. We've also got at the very bottom FX, A, B, C, and D. There's 4 dedicated effects channels that you can, or there's 4 dedicated effects returns that you can program however you like and get to from the home base here. So if I go to Effects A, what it's gonna do is bring up the effect controls on the touchscreen of the mixer. So if I wanna get to the effect controls on the app, up on the right-hand side here, even if I select the effects return channel, a nice thing about this mixer is it lets you use compression and EQ on each effect return themselves so that you can really dial in your sound and take out any transients that you don't want. But over here, there's graphic EQ, which you can insert on almost any channel, and then effects right here. If I click effects, it then brings up the same page I'm looking at on the mixer's touchscreen, which is gonna be the PAE 16 digital reverb. Now you can pick which type of reverb here you want, but on A, we've got a small hall reverb. On B, we've got a little bit of a shorter reverb, a small room. On C, we've got a delay, and on D, we have another delay, but you can put pretty much anything you want on there. All you gotta do is go to the touchscreen and then scroll through your options. Now I will say that the built-in effects on this mixer, there aren't a ton of options. There's basically just 4 reverbs and 4 delays. But PreSonus has a lot of free stuff on their website to plug in for your effects rack, so don't be disheartened. You're not gonna have to invest a lot of money to get a lot of more flexibility in your effect rack. All you gotta do is go to the PreSonus website and download those plugins. So once I've selected an effect and I like the parameters it's set to, getting it to be applied is quite simple. So if I go back to my main mix and I say, I need to send all the vocal channels to Effect A, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to Effect A here on the home screen, 1 button, and now I've got all my bus sends to that effect rack right in front of me. So you can see here, I've got all 3 vocal channels going to Effect A and Effect B and Effect C, all at the levels that make the most sense for the mix. So this is really, really handy. If you've struggled by going page to page and flipping faders to get your channels sent to the right effects at the right level, this is really handy. All I have to do is hit the effect button and my faders automatically fly to the right spot so I can send the right amount of signal to get the sound that I want. So the last thing I want to go over as far as grouping and routing goes on this mixer is subgrouping. Now, I haven't done a lot of subgrouping before I started working with this mixer, but it's a really, really great way to process your group channels, I think especially for drums and maybe even for vocals, and here's why. Like a DCA group, a subgroup is a way to control an entire group of instruments or inputs from one fader. The nice thing about a subgroup you can't do with a DCA group is on this mixer, your subgroup can be processed additionally as a group. So instead of grouping all of my drums in a DCA and then just getting volume control, or like I've done on other mixers before, taking all of my drums and feeding all of them in the aux return to one of my effect racks, which is a compressor, what I can actually do now is just take my drums, put them in a subgroup, and then I can EQ and compress that subgroup by itself without turning off the EQ, compression, gating, all the things I've done to each individual channel in that subgroup. So if you're a fan of parallel compression, especially for your drum kit, this is a great way to do that. It's also a great way to have more control over a group of instruments or vocals without taking up some room on your effects rack. And so what I've done is created a subgroup for my drums, and I'll show you how to do that here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to one of the mixes on the aux sub or matrix mixes we get 1 through 16. I'm going to pick one that's open. So for now, let's say number 5. So I'm going to push 5 here. I'm also going to select aux 5 here on the app. And then I'm going to go to the gear icon on the fader. I'm going to go to the gear, and it gives me flex mix mode, aux, subgroup, or matrix. I'm going to say I want this to be a subgroup now, okay? And that has totally changed the processing up here. I can also change the name to say drums, but I'm going to say done right now, and then I'm going to go up here and say drums. Okay, so now this is named drums, and all I have to do is when I get back out is I just need to select my channels and send them to that subgroup. Okay, so all I have to do is go to the channel I want to send to the subgroup. So for now it's channel 1, the kick drum. All I have to do is hit the select button and then hit the subgroup button, which is blue here under the assign, and then it's going to bring up this page of all the subgroups there are. There's 4 dedicated subgroups, and then there's your aux 1 through 16 flex mix groups. The downside with this mixer, with having so many subgrouping options, is that there aren't enough jacks on the back to give everything its own analog out. So sub A, B, C, and D, and also your flex mix 11 through 16, you're gonna have to use their proprietary AVB system, which is similar to Dante, to get that out of the mixer. You can reassign, but if you filled up all your other outs 1 through 10, you just don't have any more room to plug stuff in the back. And that's just part of having a small form factor of a mixer. Now that said, I've made my new drum group here called drums. I had one from before called drum subgroup. I renamed this one drums here. So I've selected kick drum number 1, channel number 1. I want to put it in this subgroup. So all I do is tap and I'm done. Then I go to channel 2, which is my kick drum. Subgroup is still highlighted. So all I have to do is tap the touchscreen again. If I go to channel 3, channel 4, and channel 5, 6, which are stereo paired with for my overheads, I now am sending my entire kit to the drums subgroup. Now it's important to note, because I already made a drum subgroup, this happened already, is this main button was deselected from before. You need to make sure if you're sending to a subgroup that you turn off the main left-right assignment for that channel. You want that to only go to the subgroup, okay? I'm a really big fan of this subgrouping feature. I really think you should utilize it. It gives you a lot of flexibility to control the sound of your instruments, especially if you want to add an additional layer of EQ or an additional layer of compression to things like drums or vocals. And this mixer lets you do that. And what's great is, again, if I go to my user page, I can have my drum subgroup sitting right here in front of me, and I can control my entire drum kit with just one fader. It's just too great. It's too great. So lastly, something that's important to a lot of you is making sure you get a great recording from your Sunday service. I'm here to tell you that this mixer does a great job making that easy and accessible. You do not need, if you want a multi-track recording from everything on your mixer, you do not need any laptops, hard drives, or interfaces anymore. All you need is a simple and inexpensive SD card. So if I look up at my touchscreen, I can see right here there's a slot for an SD card. And if I hit this edit button and bring that up, on the mixer itself, I'm going to see this page that has new session or load session. So I want a new session. I want to record what's going on. That's me. I'd like to create that new session so that I know exactly what we worked on here today. Now that I'm here, I can go to ARM tracks. I literally just have to push one button, which is all. So I've now selected all 32 inputs and the 2 main outs. So a 34 track recording is now going on this SD card, and as soon as I'm ready to go, all I have to do is hit the record button. And now I'm getting an awesome recording of what's going on in the mixer. So I'm done with that. So all I have to do is hit the undo the record lock, hit stop, and let it finish processing on the SD card. All I have to do is hit save and close. Then it's going to wrap that onto the SD card. And now that it's on there, I can go back to this page. I can hit load session. I can load here, hit the recall button, bring up what we just recorded, and then play it back through the mixer, which is great because it means that to do a virtual sound check, you do not need a DAW that may cost you some money. There's some that are free, but you just don't have to worry about that. I hope you enjoy getting to know a little bit more about this mixer. But if you have any questions or comments about it and you'd like to leave them in the comments below, feel free to do that. We would love to connect with you there. For links to this console and all of our other gear recommendations, click the link below. Make sure you check out worshiptechschool.com for in-depth courses on church sound and implementing other technology in the worship environment. We also have an online community and live support, so click the link below and find out more. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, hit the thumbs up button below and share it with your friends in ministry who might also find it helpful. You can check out some related content right over there, and don't forget to subscribe to the Churchfront channel so that you can continue to receive our latest content to help grow yourself and grow your church.